My name is Dan Finucane, and I'm currently a regent. I love folk music, blues music, and I love singing and playing with other people.
My name is Ian Peoples. I'm a Jesuit regent. I'm kind of a football fanatic. Most of my weekends are spent watching at least a few games. I'm probably one of the biggest Lionel Messi fans. Hello and welcome back to Magis Talk. My name is Ian Peoples and I'm joined by my co-host and brother Jesuit, Dan Finucane.
And today we are joined by Dr. Clara Cuellar, who we are really excited to have here, who is currently serving as the director of the YMCA in Belize, on the south side in Belize City. Dr. Cuellar has a PhD in sports management from The Ohio State University and is also a parishioner at St. Martin de Porres Parish in Belize City. She does fantastic work with the youth at the YMCA that Ian has had a chance to get to know a little bit. And we are very excited to talk about that work and more today. So Dr. Cuellar, welcome to our show. We're glad to have you.
Well, thank you all very much for inviting me. I hope I can fit in and contribute something to the entire process.
Oh, I have no doubt. Dan and I were having a conversation earlier about the Ohio State. Can you tell us why it's called the Ohio State University?
Well, I only use the Ohio State University when I speak to Americans because they know. So it's an American issue. I believe there's Ohio State as well there. But the Buckeyes have a strong sense of in Ohio where it's at, the Ohio State University. Okay. So Buckeyes sports is huge, and there's no professional football team there, so the Bucks are.
Yeah, it's in Columbus, correct?
That is correct.
So they do have a soccer team, but they don't. Yeah, so real football. They have a real football team, but not an American football team. Yes. Well, it's great to have you on. Usually one thing we begin our show is to just ask our guests about the impact and the role of their faith growing up. So can you share with us a little bit about what role your faith played as you were growing up and just a little bit about your life here in Belize? I'm
not sure I would have said my faith when I was growing up. I think somewhere around standard 4, so I guess 10, 11, while I was at Holy Redeemer School, we had a book called The Reader, and in it had some awesome stories, and 2 of them hit me. So I became impacted by the gospel teachings of Jesus Christ. I found the stories, because it was stories, fascinating. It seems like, to me, he was a rebel. He went against every norm that seemed to be, and he stood up for every person that wasn't being stood up for. So that was fascinating. And then I saw it lived out in a different way in 2 of the other stories, one by Mahatma Gandhi and one by Martin Luther King. Actually, there were 2 stories. One of the stories were called Warrior Without a Gun. And so that sense of, I was already playing sports and I love competition in sports. That sense of warrior without a gun really spoke to me, as well as a sense of, it just seemed that in the Jesus stories that I was taught, the timeliness and the timelessness of it was always great. Like showing up just when a weak person might need them, and just knowing what to tell a bully instead of just fighting them the way maybe I would have and still have to be careful that I don't do. And those things stuck with me throughout my years.
Do you recall which gospel stories really impacted you as a child? I mean, I can think of one particularly with what you're talking about, but I want to know if there are any particular stories from the Gospels that really struck you.
Well, I like when Jesus talked about, those who choose to sit at the front of any table or at the front of any receptions and want to be served first instead of going to the back. I remember the woman who gave her 2 pence. I remember when he met the woman at the well, when he said, if you'd only know who you're asking for water, but critical. And I remember the woman stoning, the way how he's able to diffuse situations, and those were some of the stories that spoke to me. Just trying to get a sense of equity among people, and sharing love. That was really huge. And so they were difficult situation, and what his response was always not what was the norm of the culture, and it's more what he was trying to teach. I want love and mercy, not all this fanfare.
And kind of pushing people's imagination further, and inviting them into, that example of table fellowship. Who's invited, who's not, where do you sit, and kind of overturning what the expectations are.
I like the overturning. And I guess for me as a youth, I didn't just see it as inviting. I just see it as, because the competitive side of me would see it as cool, somebody standing up for me. So I saw it. Or my friends, somebody saying. So I like to tease. I think around that time, you learn a lot about etiquette, and there's a book that was out about mismanners or table. And I rebelled against those things, so that was my evidence of why I should continue to rebel.
What would be, I'm curious, are you sitting, as a teenager, throwing food? How are you rebelling against etiquette at table?
No. Throwing food is not a Belizean issue, because it's a waste. So that I rebel against. What I mean is, the same as you say, that there's so much protocol in terms of how you should dress, how you should speak, how you should behave, and too much emphasis on that instead of just on our hearts and how we welcome to the table. So, I believe in many of the values. I don't want you to get me wrong. I still say you should. My parents had me washing my tennis every weekend, and I did it throughout college, even though I had the option not to, and I think that it's important. But if I walk in because my tennis shoe isn't clean or somebody else did, we don't have to make a big issue of it. That's where the rebellion is. The rebellion is, let's look in the heart. And I remember actually stories from my parents and my grandparents about George Price. He would always say, don't be ashamed of coming home dirty from work or going to work in something that's stained. And that's what we're saying. We look too much on the outside. That's what I was rebelling against.
Yeah, and Dan and I have definitely, I think, heard that in different synodal conversations that we've had, that we've mentioned previously on our show, about, I think on our episode with Miss Melissa Espot, but about there's a lot of people we heard from who said they feel judged when they go into church for these external things that I think you're referring to. And yeah, I have a funny story of rebelling at table myself, but not intentionally. I was never put through a formal etiquette course. My parents taught me well, but there was one day when in Kansas City as a novice, we were eating at a house in Kansas City where we were staying, and we had invited the bishop over. And so the bishop, and I was sitting next to, I didn't necessarily sit myself at the high table, but I was next to the bishop. So, but I was just eating and talking and, enjoyed the dinner and felt like everything went fine. And afterwards, my novice director pulled me aside. He's like, Ian, you ate the asparagus with your hands, rather than using forks and whatnot to cut it. And he said, but then I think the bishop did the same, so it's all right. But it was kind of it wasn't intentional, but I guess, that etiquette can, I think it's something that, it has its place, like you're saying, right? But it's also, if it's used as being the most important thing, rather than sort of welcoming people and being loving towards others, then it becomes disordered, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Kind of going back to what you were saying, your love of sports and competing as a young person. What got you interested? Was that a big piece of what got you interested in sports management and getting your PhD in that field?
Well, directly, it was a hobby. Here in Belize at the time, you're not paid. People still aren't paid enough to live their life of sports. I say if I had my option, I would have been a coach. So actually, I loved biology and math a lot. And then body in motion is biology. What's the point of biology without the body in motion? And then the psychology behind the sport. So I was blessed to have a good friend that went away and studied before me. And actually, she may not remember, but she came home and brought me a pamphlet that said physical education. And I was like, this is it. And then I laughed and I said, so are you going to go tell my parents that's what I'm going to study? Because nobody would respect such a degree or profession at the time. One is not even hired. I had to minor in math so that when I was hired, when I finished, and my first degree was in Lafayette, Louisiana, University of Louisiana, Lafayette. Okay. So I'm a raging Cajun.
All right.
Proud raging Cajun.
Yes. All right.
Love the culture, the Cajun culture. And I was hired to be a math teacher and I coached for free, even though that was my major at SJC. So.
Okay. How did you find the Raging Cajuns?
Loved it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, how did you discover the school itself? Because Lafayette is not a...
We had a few Belizeans that had gone ahead of me, and several of them, my older sister was there, so it was an easy fit. But for me, I like to say they love dancing, eating, drinking beer, and going to church.
They're very, I mean, I think, and there's it's a different spelling of Creole, but there's a Creole culture there as well, right? And there's similarities between the two cultures. Obviously, there's obvious differences as well. They have a strong French influence, which is noticeable there. Did you ever, so Lafayette, for our viewers who don't know, is right down the highway, just a few miles from where Dan and I did our novitiate, our first 2 years of Jesuit life in Grand Coteau. So did you ever make your way over to Grand Coteau?
I believe I did, but I don't remember. So at the time, I'd been to many small areas. I've been to Abbeville, to Cuellar, I'd been on rice fields. It was my first time driving a combine. I had a great family that would invite me over.
All right.
So I found I fit in very well with my friends' parents because of the generation gap. Like, if you talk about cleaning a chicken, people your age didn't know about it, but their parents did. So, and I was an early riser, so you find I go spend the weekend or the 4 days, 5 days for Thanksgiving, and I'm up with their parents having a blast, going out on the field. But you're right, they really like music. I enjoy the Cajun music, the Cajun food, the seasoning. So I like being in Southwest Louisiana because we used to say that's where Cajun really is. Wasn't being marketed. And even here in Belize, as we market certain things, like even Johnny Cake, it's not like the ones we eat at home because it's tailored to what the tourist prefers. Well, in Southwest Louisiana, I remember this woman in Kawalan said, here we eat everything but the moon. And I was like, what? I didn't understand her. And then when she explained, I cracked up laughing. They eat all parts of the cow except the moon. So I fit in. I liked it.
And then, so you ended up back in Belize and you taught math and then coached. And then what then led you to pursue your PhD then? What was the story there?
I must say at Louisiana, they encouraged me strongly to go ahead, but I had loans, and two, I wasn't sure what I really wanted to do, what I could do and return home. And I was committed to coming home for my own self. I wanted to be here in Belize. So I said, let me go and see what will pan out. I had options for my master's. So after coming here, I also served on the National Sports Council at that time. I was recruited to be on the National Sports Council, which is a volunteer position at the national level. And I loved it. And I started seeing certain things that one would need to do and where the place was. I still loved coaching and I loved youth sports. I loved physical education. We had a great college at Lafayette in terms of I traveled with them and presented and things like that. So I figured I was coaching at SJC and winning, and I knew that I didn't have the best athletes. So I wanted to know what it would be like to coach the teams I saw with better athletes to run against our team. And thus the national interest became big in my heart. And that's when I decided to leave and go on and study. I was part of the first Belize Games planning, along with actually Mr. Omar Habet and a gentleman that just celebrated his 101st birthday, I think, Mr. Bertie Ellis, and several of those. So I was around a lot of older gentlemen who worked hard in sports and some women. And I learned a lot about our history and their passion, what their dreams. And I said, if we could strategically plan for these things and get it done, it would be great. And at the time, we had a minister in sports, actually. The Honorable Syed Musa was huge on supporting the Sports Council at that time. So I decided it was time to go.
All right. And you finished your PhD. When did you start at the YMCA? When did you start as director at the YMCA?
I think in 2005.
2005. Okay, so you've been there a good while now, and if you could, what is the mission of YMCA Belize? In your own words, right? There might be a mission articulated on your website, but what is the mission of YMCA in your words?
To foster a sense of love and belonging to our youth.
And how do you go about doing that? What are ways that you go about accomplishing that mission, which is a very important and powerful mission? But yeah, what are ways that you go about accomplishing that?
I think that trying to teach love is a lifelong. Trying to teach sense of belonging and friendship is a huge undertaking because it's not simple, it's complex. It's not difficult, it's complex, and it's ongoing and it grows. So I remember somebody once telling me, common sense is like a tree, but it has to keep growing. What's common sense today is not tomorrow. And love has that same kind of undertaking, which is why I could refer back to those stories I liked when I was a child, because love is love, but put into action. Like for me, I'm forever challenged. I mean, I fall off the track all the time. The love track, the love train, whatever we'd call it. And so I have to get back on and, and I've been working at it for so long. And working with young people too, they have so much faith and forgiveness and willingness to try again to get back up, and they just help me a lot. But I'd say doing that at the Y just means helping them to discover who they are, what their gifts are, and trying to live that out honestly and in a caring way, learning to love myself and learning to love others and what that truly means. And it really is a challenging journey, but it's a fun journey because it has so much positives in it, so many things to celebrate along the way.
And it sounds like, I mean, you just alluded to it, it sounds like your faith plays a big role in this kind of work. How would you say a little bit more about how your faith plays out on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I don't say it a lot because I feel it so much. So some days I'm the person at the front of the church and some days I'm the person at the back. But I think that gives a real example to the youths that it's okay to fail and that we are not perfect and we have to take the plank out of our own eyes before we take the splinter out of someone else's. And if in those tough moments where I'm failing, I can remember that the good of that for me is that I now become an example of how to live that out. So yes, my faith is the reason that I'm there so many years. There's no question about it, because it is extremely difficult, as both of you know in the service you do here in Belize and in your faith, that when we see people suffer, or when we see horrible wrong being done by those who have major responsibility and therefore impacting so many of our citizens who are already suffering, our brothers and sisters, that's hard to stomach, you know? And then there are the natural tragedies, and then there are all the violence, some not natural. So that's extremely difficult to suffer. So it is my faith that will keep my hope going. It is my faith that allows me to see the rays of sun and smile and give hope and appreciate all the great people who are out here in Belize. I mean, YMCA survives because of that faith. Not in me, but in so many others who are willing to say, okay, I'll help sponsor a birthday at the Y. Because like I said, in living out love at the Y, we're becoming, and to Belizean societies, little godmothers or aunts. It's a second home for them. And here they must eat well, they must be included. Everybody has to be included at the table. And yet everybody has to have responsibility at the table. So we're growing together. They're challenging us as staff, and the staff is challenging others. And we're so blessed to have we use a lot of retired teachers, because for them it's not work, it's a mission. Teaching was a mission always in Belize. So they come excited about the opportunity to teach students on the periphery, but they also come excited about loving the children. That's what they have. So at the Y, even though we do academics, that's not our main goal. Our main goal is love and building family. And the joy of that is, over the years, I can invite back a teacher 5 years later to celebrate a graduation, and they're excited because they were with that child 4 years down the road. So we do that.
That's
we
great.
invite in our older staff to have fun.
And you mentioned a couple times, well, especially about witnessing suffering and how difficult that is. I think most of our audience knows, you know, that the YMCA Belize is located on Farbers Road in the South Side, which is where a lot of gang activity is located. So our kids are facing that struggle. But can you just sort of tease out maybe, or explain to us and our viewers, what are struggles that the young people that you work with at the Y, what kind of struggles are they facing and overcoming, right? Because you also, like, you see these success stories, right? And what kind of challenges are they facing on a day-to-day basis?
I like to say that some of the difficulties in some of our neighborhoods and is just that sense of lawlessness and hopelessness. Lawlessness because, you know, people take over the sidewalks, kids can't use, you know, their bicycles to go to school. So it is complex, because you might see somebody, an older sibling or a parent riding a child on a bike, but that's because if the child rides the bike on their own, the traffic is not regulated very well enough that they will be safe. So it's really hard and complex to tease out right from wrong, what would seem like right or wrong. And so, or even though we know what's right, I guess I would say then preserve judgment though. You know, preserve the judging, because there's a deeper sense if we can understand what people are doing, and then help to make good judgment. So yes, at the Y we tell them, don't ride someone on your bicycle because it's not good. But we sit down and have a conversation on why they do it and how they do it. And so our young people go through surmounting many things before they get at their classrooms. And so then, and not to mention trauma in a lot of the families. So I was taught, we get a lot of professional volunteers who come in and do sessions with us and with our staff. And I was taught, when you look at a child and you say in a classroom or in a setting under our picnic table, when we say, where are you? You're not here. And we were taught, they literally are not there. They've checked out, because that's how they cope by checking out. So getting young people to learn to trust and build trusting relationship is an important part of what we do. Learning for them to strengthen within so that they can grow and develop something different with hope for themselves.
And what role, obviously, I mean, I would say the YMCA seems to be doing the work of the church, even if it's not explicitly, claiming that it's doing a lot of the same work that ideally the church community does. What role do you see for the church, kind of in the kind of work you do, but just more generally working with the youth?
I think we need an open door. We need to, the saying isn't new that we need to live the gospel, not preach it. So, and that's difficult because we cannot allow, even for the why, we cannot allow an 8 to 5 job. Because the need of our community is before, from they wake up in the morning. The needs of our communities until they go to sleep at night. And in strategic leadership, we focus on work hours. And that's not what they need us. They need us on weekends. They need us in the evening. So things that I know St. Martin does, like, well, I'm not sure what all is back on track now, but the feeding program in the morning and the fact that they even feed people who don't go to St. Martin's is awesome, because that's what kids will do. They will bring their friend. So while we have to be careful and make sure there are guidelines for registration and protocols, there we go back to it, we cannot let those stop us from giving a Johnny cake to a child. And, or putting the Johnny cake in your pocket because I know you will give your friend who can't come. So that is that's the balance that we need, and we don't always strike it, but we must keep it in mind. So yes, a feeding program for breakfast is good, and the fact that they're brothers but go to 2 different schools and they still can both come instead of you're not a member of St. Martin's is important.
It strikes me, like, listening to your answer here and then your answer to the last question, that like the kind of attentiveness that you and the people you work with have to have. You have to be close. You have to be engaged. You have to. It is a day in, day out. It is more than just an 8 to 5. It's more than a job, and I think that just seems to me to echo a lot of what Pope Francis talks about getting close enough to encounter and to know, just the detail of why would somebody, ride a bike with their kid. Well, there actually might be a good reason, and it's about asking rather than bringing the judgment about, well, what does this mean? But taking the time then to just say, well, tell me about your experience. Why is your life? Why do you do this the way you do it? Tell me about it. I'm interested in you.
Yeah, I think the role that sports play is also very important in my leadership style and in my team building style at the YMCA. And what I like about it is we know that the professional sports all go towards who gets the Wheaties box, but the tradition that I grew up with in physical education and sports was the traditional way of playing teams. Everybody is valued on the team, and everybody has a role to play. So I have a responsibility to learn my role properly, to work hard, and then I have a responsibility to help you and to help you with your role, because then collectively, I like to say, whether it's basketball, it's 5 against 5. But the minute that a member on my team has to worry about their teammates bringing pressure on them, then the other team is only playing against 4 because I'm out of the game. I'm mentally out of the game. So I like to say, if we come in as a unit of 5 playing against you, we're strong. And so that's what we try to build together. Let's learn to listen to each other. So the students do a lot of team circle, and we literally call it team circle. How we learn to listen to each other, and also how we learn to gain confidence in expressing our voices in that team.
And that's wonderful. What that makes me think of is the body of Christ, right? That there are many members but one body. And so if the church maybe took this approach where like we're a team, we're one unit, and we need to work together in recognizing how united we are with other people, with the rest of the church, I think if we keep that at the forefront of our minds, I feel like we would have a much more powerful effect in the work or ministry or whatever we're doing. And which leads to my penultimate question for our last one. What are your hopes for the church in Belize?
That we practice more of this gospel values that invites everybody to the table, and that I don't have to sit at the same spot every time, that we rotate spots, that we don't claim things. I mean, there's a generation coming behind us, or there's somebody just to the right or left of me that hasn't come to church before, so you can have that seat. So we need to keep welcoming and inviting and making sure that people fit in, and that's not easy though, but that's what we have to keep working on. How do we keep respect and know this is not for me?
Yeah, that's right.
It belongs to us.
Yeah. Rather than us and them, it's just us.
Yeah, we're all us.
Yeah.
All of us belong to that team. One body.
One body.
Well, ironically, our last question is about asking what your favorite team is, your favorite sports team. So we might have a little bit of division here, depending on what our answers are. But
This is a question we'll all answer.
We'll all answer this question. That's our tradition on the show. So if you had to pick a favorite sports team, and it can be, a national team, it can be a professional team, it can be
Team from a particular era, in history.
open-ended.
What team is that and why? What's your favorite sports team?
Whoa, that's a tough one. I mean, we're talking baseball, we're talking football, the real one with your feet, you're talking softball.
We have to narrow it
we're
down.
talking-
Yeah. You can just choose one. Just if you have, but
Well, let me say this: when I learned American football, I was like, who has 4 hours to sit down and watch something on a Saturday? I mean, I have a life. But I must say, to the testament of Buckeyes, it's the one team I will find time to watch football. Okay. I'll do a lot of things around doing it. I'll get housework done, cooking done. So go Bucks, and they love to win, so I like to watch them. I love to win along with them, whether it's basketball or football. However, as a kid growing up, and I'll pick our Belize national team, and there have been other teams that show that. Our softball team, the Golden Girls.
The national softball team.
Yeah,
Okay.
Golden Girls. I guess it was in the 70s. They had what we're talking about in sports as well as in the church. They were hardworking, they were committed, they were a table of women that loved what they did and worked hard at it, and they showed themselves well and then showed the country well when they could go against Canada, Costa Rica, US, Cuba, and win. So in the hearts of hearts, they were the underdogs, and they shone. And I think that we have teams since then. I don't want anybody to forget, but I was a little girl, that's a huge impression. Australia was ranked 4th in the world, and we took them on at the MCC grounds and they only got that chance. We as a country, we identify with our teams because of how good these women were, and kudos to them.
All right, Ian, you're next.
Yeah, narrowing it down, I think I would have to go with 2015 FC Barcelona, that won the treble. So the treble, for those, most of you probably know, but the treble is the National League. So for Barcelona, this was La Liga, and then they win the national tournament, which is the Copa del Rey, and then the Champions League. which is the tournament of all the top teams in the European leagues. And so the treble is this sort of rarefied, goal that all these teams have who are good. And that year they got the treble, and it was a magical year particularly for my favorite player, Lionel Messi, who had one of the best goals in Copa del Rey history in the final, where he dribbled 5 players and scored an amazing goal. Look it up; it's great. And then what he did to Bayern Munich in the semifinals of the Champions League, he just utterly embarrassed them. Again, look it up. It's one of the greatest goals in history, where he just drops a guy on his back and then chips the goalkeeper from about 8 yards out. So, just a magical year where they took home all the big trophies. And they did it in a beautiful way. And it was just so fun to watch, and kind of stands out in my memory. Yeah. So Dan, over to you.
So for me, this is very easy. I'll give a general answer and then a specific year. So the St. Louis Cardinals baseball team, best baseball team of all time, obviously. But I'm going to go with 2011 as maybe not their best team, but it's the year that they squeaked into the playoffs and then made it to the World Series against the Rangers, Texas Rangers. And in Game 6, they were just having a terrible game. The third baseman dropped a routine pop fly. And I remember watching it just being like, what is going on here? And it was at home. It was in St. Louis. And they were down to their last out twice in that game. And they came back both times. They won that game, and then they won Game 7 to win the World Series. And it was, I think everybody in St. Louis is a Cardinals fan, chokes up. I actually feel a little choked up talking about it, which is maybe ridiculous. But it was such a unifying thing for the whole city. I remember I was able to go home for the parade, which is ridiculous. I had access to a cheap plane ticket. And just to be in a crowd and celebrating this team that had really endured so much adversity. They were counted out so many times. And then there was weird stuff that happened in the playoffs. There was a squirrel that went on the field at one point that became the rally squirrel. Just weird stuff, right? But it became this thing where everybody in the city just erupted with excitement. And I'm hoping that there will be a repeat of that this year.
That's right. Albert Pujols, future Hall of Famer Albert Pujols is having a great season.
It's his last season. He just passed Babe Ruth he's tied with Babe Ruth for second all time in runs batted in.
Yeah, when you tie the Babe, you've made it into the upper echelons of baseball.
That's right.
History.
It's interesting because you talk baseball, and that's not something I had growing up. But when I got older, there's only one baseball team for me.
Who's that?
Cardinals.
Oh, right. There you go. That's all right.
And we have a strong relationship with St. Louis YMCA. And 2 or 3 times on my visit there, and each time they get to the final, like the one you talked about, and I'm in town, they win.
Do you have any plans to go up there in the next couple of months?
Yeah.
But I'll be honest, no, and so I have caps, I have whatever. So I think it's kind of fun, and you're right. I think the last game we had to travel, and the whole thing. So the conference was in San Francisco. Yeah. And the text goes out, St. Louis gang meeting at a certain pub, and everybody knows why. We gotta watch the game. So it's kind of fun watching with them and doing it. But no, I'm not on sports the same way you guys are with the stats. But I know the emotion. That's the kind of thing we felt with the Golden Girls. So, but I just tell you what, I was happy that you picked Cardinals because.
Yes, he's true St. Louisan.
All right.
Well, that concludes our show for today. We want to thank you for being with us, and we want to especially thank you, Dr. Clara Cuellar, from The Ohio State University, Belize YMCA Director, for joining us and providing some great insight on living the gospel. And I've seen it firsthand that you're doing it. You and your staff are living the gospel, and you're teaching young people how to do that as well by your example. So thank you for being with us on the show and sharing with us. If you have comments leave us on Facebook or YouTube. To leave us on Facebook or YouTube, please do that. And we look forward to being with you again next week. God bless y'all.